Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast. And Lawson and I have a treat for you today, and that is we get to start a new series. We're going to do 10 or 11 in a row, and it's going to be on a specific topic. I'll let Lawson introduce the topic here in just a minute. And then, Lawson, we have a special guest with us today. The topic of the book, Lawson, you can cover that, and then we'll introduce our special guest.
I'm excited as anybody for this because it's going to be pretty new to me as well. So thank you for my advanced copy of Bring Your Hammer. And Eric, it's great to meet you in person. You know, I was thinking earlier today that I get to meet you, but we're recording this obviously audio only, but I see you in the video, and I thought this morning, like, it's kind of weird. Like, we've all gotten pretty used to saying good to meet you when we see somebody on a computer screen video wise versus I was like, what did we used to do? Well, it was on the phone. You didn't see somebody and you go, I can't wait to meet you. You know, when that day comes, when we actually see somebody in person, but I don't like it. We're so used to seeing people on video now. I don't like it, but,
Deep
so, right.
That's not even actually Eric. That's just his avatar. Not even actually.
But I'm
Eric.
super glad to see your face, man. Great job on the book. Bring Your Hammer about Nehemiah. So today will be a prequel, I guess, to a 10-part series that we're going to do, breaking down some of the chapters. There are a lot of chapters, which I like. Short, punchy chapters, one after the next. You feel like you're getting somewhere, when you go through a book like this. So we picked out some particular ones that I thought would resonate with our audience, kind of the things that we've been talking through over the last few months. And so we've kind of cherry picked some of those chapters, but starting with chapter 1 next episode. So today is overview. How did you guys come up with this? What are some of the grounding principles that led you to doing what you did specifically with Nehemiah? Why the name Bring Your Hammer? Talk about the whole thing. Get us going. Can't take it from there.
I'll do a quick kind of kickoff. I'll do a quick kind of kickoff, and then I'll turn it over to Eric for some comments real quick. About, 3 or 4 years ago, I read the book of Nehemiah, again. I've probably read it, 3 or 4 times in my adult life through some, read the Bible in a year plan or something like that. And so I read it, and I guess because I'm living in this fatherhood space every day, every month, I'm doing something fatherhood related. Mm-hmm. It just felt like ideas for dads were jumping off the page at me. So as I read through it, I remember taking a bunch of notes oh, that's an interesting thing. And that's an interesting thing. And so I ended up with this list of about 30 or 35 fairly unique ideas. I don't mean the ideas were unique. They were discrete. So separate lessons that I got out of the book of Nehemiah. And so one night at dinner with our board chairman and my wife and his wife, we're sitting around talking about, next things. And I said, man, I really want to crank out this book on Nehemiah, lessons for dads from the book of Nehemiah. And so I wrote all of them down. And then it went a year and a half. And I just could not get enough discipline to write. I'd already written 2 books. So it's not like the book writing process was totally foreign to me. I just couldn't crank it out. And then one day I thought, man, you know what I should do? I should call Eric Ballard. He's written for Manhood Journey. He's written his own books. This guy's written a lot of ministry curriculum. He's been around the block. He knows his way around the writing problems and the challenges. And I called him up and said, hey man, you want to collaborate with me on a book? And foolishly, he says, yes, and has lived to regret it. Eric, tell us a little bit about just you in general. I know you pretty well. We've spent some time together. Our audience may not know you just yet. So tell them a little bit about you, your family, your kids, where you live, that kind of thing.
All right. So since this is just an audio only, I need to make sure everyone knows exactly how good looking I am. And then compared to models, part-time model, mainly like JCPenney catalog kind of stuff. So good looking, but not,
right.
Amazing actor like. Anyway, so I grew up in Mississippi, went to Mississippi State University. As we talked to before the show, you guys tried to get in, couldn't quite get there. luxurious school. I met my wife while she went to Mississippi State as well. Her name is Candace. We have 2 beautiful daughters. This past weekend, actually, my youngest one turned 8, and we went ice skating. First time I've done that since high school, and I'm not great. I stayed upright, was able to do that, keep that going. But we live in Texas, small town north of Houston. Moved here about 10 years ago, and man, love it. Love being a Texan. I get why everyone from here is so arrogant.
No offense to our listeners in Texas.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, you guys are great. I was talking about that.
Great. It's the other people. So how'd you go ice skating in north of Houston? I mean, I know they can manufacture ice, I guess, wherever, but is ice skating a big deal near Houston?
No, but there's a couple malls that have ice skating rinks. And so it was me and a bunch of like 10-year-old girls and ladies. I fit right in.
Talk a little bit, Eric, about things you've written, some of your prior publications.
All right. So I was a youth and college pastor for about 20 years, close to that. And so a lot of stuff I write is focused towards teenagers, devotions, curriculum, Bible studies, things like that. And then as I was growing older and started having kids of my own, man, fatherhood and manhood and brotherhood, all that stuff really started to matter to me. And so that became a big focus of what I write, a big thing. Like when me and other dads are together, that's what we talk about. Hey, how are you handling this type of situation? How are you dealing with this? And just the common struggles we have. And so that became like a passion to kind of just dig into that material and write about it, learn about it, study it.
What was the early on, like what happened that you had some realization or just some desire, like, you know what, I'm going to start it? Because you talk to a lot of people that I'm one of them that wants to have written a book or something like that. How did you finally come to roll your sleeves up, get out the laptop and go at it?
So I was working at a church in Auburn, Alabama. I was the junior high youth minister there. And it was a big church. We would go, when we would take a retreat, we'd take 500 people with us. And so the senior high guy, who was my boss, said, hey, this year I want you to write the curriculum for the weekend. I was like, what do I know about? I don't know how to do, I don't want to do this. And so dug into it and just like loved it. Loved the research that went into it. Loved the writing part. And so during the weekend, I'm checking in with all the different small group leaders. Hey, how are things going? What can I do to help you? And they were very encouraging of the material. I said, hey, where did you guys buy this? I really like it. And I got that comment a few times. And I thought, well, if you thought we bought it, maybe other people would be willing.
Hey, that's cool. Yeah, right on.
So I just started writing some stuff and submitting it off, and
very cool.
People interested in it, and
so from a novice like me that doesn't know anything about how to write a book, and your book now with Kent, Bring Your Hammer, about Nehemiah, how much of that is like time wise on a pie chart? How much of your time is spent on research? How much is spent actually typing, and then how much is kicking it around in conversation? Because thinking of our guys out there in the audience that are anxious to go on Amazon and look for this book and use it in their own life as a father, out of curiosity's sake, how do you create a book?
Well, I think it's different for all writers, different processes they have. For me, in this book specifically, it was a little easier because Kent, as you mentioned earlier, he had kind of scoped out all the chapters, had ideas and a little bit of a framework for how he wanted it to look. And so once he passed those on to me, a good chunk of that's research. And after that is done, after I like, okay, this is how I want to talk about this. The writing part of it, comes really quickly. After the idea is there and the topic of each chapter is there, you have a direction you're going. It's pretty easy to write after that.
I think, Lawson, one of the things about Eric that's really unique, I've worked with, 30 or 40 writers because I used to work in the advertising business. And so I've worked with a lot of folks who can put pen to paper. Eric is one of the fastest writers at being able to go from, hey man, here's an idea, like take a rock and a balloon and an airplane and give me a chapter, and like 3 hours later, the dude's got a chapter and it's got humor in it. It's got some Bible verses in it. It's, he is really, really efficient. Eric, I thought you probably went through the content faster even than I thought you would. Did you feel like it went fast, or did you feel like it was kind of a slog?
No, it felt fast. I think Lawson mentioned this earlier. Like I had a general idea and concept of Nehemiah, right? I think I was in a church musical in like 5th grade about Nehemiah. With some of that knowledge rattling around, but getting to dig into it with your insight. So you were like outside commentary as I'm studying the chapters. And so those two things coming together, yeah, it went pretty quick, I felt.
And Lawson, by outside commentary, what Eric means is hypercritical. Hypercritical. It's just kind of like doing a podcast with me.
Yeah, what a
you
shock.
just gotta like it's like swallowing cough syrup.
The other thing I noticed is it looks like, you guys explained this, it looks like you didn't, the whole book isn't written with your voices interwoven in every chapter. There's a chapter that Kent wrote, there's a chapter that Eric wrote, chapter that Kent wrote, although I will notice, I think the first 6 are by Kent because he's just always got to be first.
That's basically how far I got before I just gave up and said, I'm going to need some help.
Right. I can't do anymore. There's going to be about 30, but I've gone as far as I can. How did you guys land on the chapters, and how did you come up with the name?
Man, I think for the chapters, it was definitely collaborative. We started out with closer to, I think, Eric, if I remember right, about 35. And then we were kind of like, these two are really similar. Let's just reduce it down to 1. And so we probably brushed aside 7 or 8 of them as we went. We weren't shooting for any magic number other than to get all the ideas on paper. We ended up with 28. They were more just topical. It's like, Nehemiah was a prayer warrior. He planned well, or he, mobilized people or resources. So I think as we went down, the number just kind of floated to what the number became. Mm-hmm. At least that's my memory. It's been a little while since we actually did the writing. We've waited a bit to publish it for reasons of more just timing in our ministry. Is that how you remember it, Eric? Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah. Like I said, you did a lot of the pre-work, the planning. And so there were a couple, but not many. There's only a handful that were like, these seem so similar. Let's try and push them together. And we're able to do that. And like you said, you had a great idea of keeping the chapters very short. And so we weren't, some books like this can have the tendency to repeat itself over and over and over again. But because of how Kent said, let's just keep the chapters short, say what we need to say, and then move on.
I like that.
It's like all the content, in my opinion, is solid and not like fluff to fill pages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because anytime I try to do that, Kent said, let's cut that out. This is garbage.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm sure there's a process you go through to cut fluff out. So go into a little more detail. Why Nehemiah in particular? Who is he? Why write a book about him? And specifically, why him for a book for fathers?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a little bit counterintuitive to some degree, in the sense that, as far as we can tell, biblically, Nehemiah was not a dad. Like there's no mention of him having a family. There's no mention of him being married at any point. He had kind of a singular job before we hear about him going to Jerusalem. He's working as a cupbearer in the king's court. And so he's a wine taster and a food protector. Usually that person, you can look at that person as one of 2 ways. You can either see him as a slave, or you could see him as kind of a sort of trusted advisor, where that person can't be bought or bribed because they're carrying food and wine to the king. And then, the fact that they're alive signifies they've tasted it and tried it, and that the king can safely drink it or eat it. And so
kind of like an old time version of the Secret Service.
Yeah. I mean, some
very
would
trusted.
Say, absolutely. Absolutely. And so they kind of have, indirectly, they have the ear of the king. Indirectly, not that they can go running in any day and just get whatever they want, but they do have at least access to the king. And so as I read through it, I thought, man, there's a lot of lessons here, because the parallel we would draw is that Nehemiah, he saw Jerusalem and the people of Israel like most dads should see their families. Nehemiah felt responsible. He felt connected. He felt deeply cared for these people. That's who he came from. His heritage was there. And so we see that kind of like as a dad, the parallel we draw in the book is that's how dads should feel about their families, is if something's going wrong in their family, like it was in the time of Nehemiah in Jerusalem, dads should want to leap into action. And then it just was this like domino effect. Eric, you can comment on maybe some things you saw in some fatherhood characteristics about Nehemiah, but it's like a domino effect of him being hundreds of miles away and needing to go and fix something. and then deciding, man, I'm going to have a plan. And then he rides off, and then he gets in the middle of it and realizes, man, there's a lot going on here. I don't know if a dad listening to this podcast has ever stepped into a situation in your family where once you stepped into it, that's when you realized, this situation is more complicated than I may have originally thought. Because when Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, he's like, oh my goodness, we got a lot of work to do. Hey, Dad, do you wrestle with anger? Man, I sure have. And so have thousands of other dads in our email list. And so what we did for those dads and for you, we built a special digital course called The Anger-Free Dad. This digital course is chock full of almost 50 assets, a bunch of teaching videos, a ton of PDF booklets and worksheets, so you can walk through and understand your anger triggers, the expectations underneath, and how to pull those out of your heart and mind so you can be a dad who is less angry and more at peace. If you take this course and you do not become less angry, you will get all of your money back. Plus, we'll send you some boxing gloves so you can beat up the wall at your house with all of your mad anger. Dad, come take the Anger-Free Dad course today at manhoodjourney.org/anger-free-dad. That's manhoodjourney.org/anger-free-dad. Eric, what are your thoughts, man, on Nehemiah as a role model for dads and that kind of thing?
So in ministries, like pastors have always looked at the book of Nehemiah as a leadership book. And as a dad, you're a God-appointed leader of your family. And so those two things certainly go hand in hand. But like Kent was saying, all the different traits, like Nehemiah was strategic and decisive. I know personally for me, and I haven't been his dad as long as you guys have, but I can struggle like, okay, what's the right decision here? And Nehemiah was just like, this is what we're doing. And he just was able to make the right decision and do it quickly. He didn't like hesitate, and man, just very decisive, very strategic. The way he was able to get the materials for the wall, I mean, this just brilliant, the way he was able to provide. And that was one of the things I think that stood out the most as I was going through this, was his ability to anticipate trouble that was like on the horizon. Man, if I could be a dad that recognizes trouble before it gets at my front door, man, I want to be a part of that. I want to know it's coming so I can be ready. And he was just so good at that. Could see around corners almost.
Eric, I have a friend named Kevin, and one time I heard Kevin praying at one of our events. He was a speaker at a fatherhood event we were doing, and he was praying, and I don't know why, but for whatever reason, his prayer just went like really deep into my mind and my heart as he prayed it. And his prayer was basically this. He said, would you, God, give us dads the wisdom to see trouble while it is still far off? And I just remember that prayer. It's been years since he did that. And I remember him and his wife, and I asked him about it later, and he and his wife would pray that often, like, God, would you show us the trouble while we can still do something about it? Because I think often as dads, we feel like, oh man, we're in the middle of something with our 15-year-old or whatever, and it's all up on top of us. And had we had a year or two,
yeah,
for sure. Lawson, you've probably had that happen. Lawson has 2 older daughters, Eric. So Lawson is the voice of wisdom on this podcast. I'm the voice of ridiculous comments. And so Lawson's the one who brings the actual perspective on raising adult children, because his kids are both grown and they're basically perfect.
You've got one that's married, dude. What are you talking about? I do.
This is true. Well, hey, we've all got our strengths. I think, Lawson, what are some things where if you look back, you think, man, we saw some problems coming early, or did you not see a problem at one point early with one of your daughters that kind of got up on top of you? I would say for us, just to let you guys kind of stew on that for just a minute while you think about maybe sharing some ideas with the dads listening, whoever's listening to this podcast. If you're in the middle of a problem that you did not see coming, God's sovereign, he's got you taken care of, but you might also still be looking ahead. I can remember even as my oldest son was hitting his early teen years, so this would have been about 10 years ago, almost 9 or 10 years ago, for whatever reason, I knew, and my wife knew, that the kinds of friends that he had around him were going to be super important. And I know that sounds really basic, like no duh, man. But I do know that instead of going down the path of just saying, hey, stay away from the bad kid or, buddy up to the good kid, one of the things we try to do is pull our kids' friends as close to us as we could possibly pull them.
Yeah.
Not in like a controlling or like fact checking kind of way, but just in like a what's going on in their life kind of way. And so I remember there are a couple of my oldest son's friends. Well, one came to our New Year's Eve party just about a month ago. And it was like catching up with an old friend for me.
Yeah.
Like I remember walking through this guy's teenage years because I wanted my kids and their friends to be kind of in my orbit. And Eric, that was part of my reaction to trying to get ahead of some of these problems. I just wanted to know who was really close to my boys and who kind of had their ear and who would they listen to. That seemed important to me when they were younger.
Are you asking Eric or me?
Both of y'all, just how did you get ahead of this? Like, did y'all see any of these problems ahead, or did you ever find yourself with one that was already on top of you where you're like, oh shoot, man, if I had seen this earlier, I maybe could have done something about this. Have you had that direct experience as a dad?
Yeah, more often than not, something would sneak up on us. It resonated when you said that, Eric, about Nehemiah being able to see around corners and from a perspective of dads being in tune and being alert. We on another episode, we talked about the analogy of building a wall around your family and keeping an eye on that wall so that when things are coming, you can kind of help protect your family. But there's also a bit of reconnaissance of mentally going out and doing a patrol and checking around outside the perimeter for what may be coming that I'm looking forward to getting into this book. I've only gone through chapter 1. I mean, Kent just got me the advanced copy. I'm super excited. And at some point, Eric, I'm going to need an autograph from you because you're going to be pretty famous, I'm sure, with this thing. But here's what I've found. Audrey, my wife, began working at the school where both girls went to high school. And so while they're doing a lot of substitute work or working in the office, she got to know a lot of the kids and could kind of help in conversation with our daughters back home. They compared notes, basically, right? And from that, you can suss out some things that are maybe brewing, or maybe they don't know about, something else that's going on in someone's life, or with our girls, with their own perception of what's happening at school, how they are being seen by other people. And so to answer your question, Kemp, I'm going to tie it to chapter 1, which we'll get into in the next episode. You guys talked about Proverbs 25, not 25, but 25, that says, purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. And the question is, do you have insight? Are you asking questions? You guys talked about Nehemiah was a good listener and asked and asked and asked because he cared so much about in that case, in his city and in his people. He loved people. But the question is, do you draw the purposes out of a person's heart by asking? And so I guess I would land on that, Kent, as part of the answer of to help us discern what may be coming in our children's lives, asking a lot of questions, getting their thoughts, drawing out of them, being a person that has insights enough to draw out of them things that they feel and believe and want and are looking for down the road, I think is something I got out of the first chapter.
Yeah. I love the process of trying to draw them out. And I'm not always very elegant or delicate in how I do it. And maybe, I don't know if it's boy girl thing. Like I've have all sons, and so in some ways it's like the way to draw it out is to kind of like rattle their cage occasionally and go, hey man, what's going on? Where that may not work as well with daughters. You guys with daughters can tell me. Eric, what are your thoughts, man, on this idea of either getting ahead of issues, but you also brought up a moment ago that Nehemiah as a book is often used as a leadership kind of text. What are some thoughts, man, you'd share with a dad listening who's thinking, maybe I am or am not going to listen to these next 10 episodes of the podcast? What would you say to that guy?
First, on the proactive thing, my wife did something similar to yours. She got a new job a little over a year ago where she works from home now. And so one of the first things she wanted to do, she wanted to join the PTO. She wanted to be at school. She wanted to know what was going on. She wanted to be in the know, is what she said. I want to know and she got to meet other parents which is big for us. That's when you said, Kent, that you want to get to know your kids. We also want to get to know the parents. We want to know, hey, what's home life for this kid? What's, what are they being fed at home? So we know, are we in agreement here, or is that something we need to be aware of? And so that was one. And then something I started that just came to mind where you're talking, Kent, about these questions, being able to ask the right questions. Something I started when my oldest daughter was a year old. This was a twofold reason. So every Saturday morning, I would get her up ready, and I would take her to a restaurant so that we could have breakfast. And part of that was so my wife could have like the morning off and just kind of do whatever she wanted to do. But the other part was we would go have breakfast, and I would just, even then, before she could even talk, I would ask her, hey, I felt dumb doing this. Hey, how was your day at school? Like I'm audibly talking to her with other people around, and that, she's just like, blah, 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 cooing and making noises. But what I was trying to instill even from before she could talk, hey, you can talk to your dad. I'm here to ask you questions. Wow. I'm here to hear whatever you have to say. So let's just talk. And so we did that. We did that every Saturday morning for like 8 or 9 years. And so when her little sister was born, she started coming with us, and it was just the two of us, or the three of us. And then my wife felt left out, and it became a family thing. She's always trying to mooch on my ideas like that. But so that was one of my, like when I look back, that's one of the best things of being proactive, because now me and my oldest daughter, we can talk about anything. And I think that stems back from a conscious effort long ago. Okay, hey, I'm going to start intentionally. We had time set aside for just you and me to talk.
Was that something, Eric, that was modeled for you somehow as a kid or as an uncle or whatever? Or did you just kind of like discover it as you became a dad? How did that idea of building the conversational sort of building blocks, how'd that come about?
So I was reading a book, I think, about another pastor, and it was an idea he had to give his wife a break and also to have time away, because he's being called all the time. He was a senior pastor, so he's, on call all the time. But he would set this special time alone. And even as like church members would see him out at the restaurant, he'd be like, I'm with my daughter, so in a nice way, you need to get out of here, buddy.
Leave me alone.
But just reading, like, as I read, I was like, God, that is brilliant. I need to do, and so I locked that away for when I had kids. And I was like, I'm going to do that.
That's really brilliant, man. I love that. What a great idea. Of course, talking to your 1-year-old at like the local restaurant.
Oh, it was, like I said, I felt silly at times. Like, yeah, daycare was cool. All right. Learn any colors this week? I mean, it was weird stuff like that, but I was trying.
Oh man. Well, good, and you did kind of burn that neural pathway in her mind that like time with dad is conversation time. And so you start to build those bridges when their brain is really malleable and elastic. Right. And so, man, and that daughter now is how old again?
She'll be 12 this summer.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Right on. That's a sweet spot.
It's going to come in real handy the next 5 or 6 years, isn't it?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah. Yes and no. I mean, now we'll start talking about things that I'm like, can we go back to colors and shapes?
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, exactly. What are some other thoughts, Eric, you had as we went through the book of Nehemiah and we were pulling out lessons and looking at just different aspects of Nehemiah's leadership, whether it was his strategy, you mentioned a moment ago, his decisiveness, he was prayerful, he was both considerate, but also kind of like kick butt and took names when he needed to. He was an interesting portrait for me in both the harder side of leadership, where you've got to be really firm and very specific, even in the building of the wall, because only a portion of the book's about the wall building. Then he's the governor for years, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. What are some things that you maybe drew out for you as a dad that we could share with the guys as maybe even a little bit of a sneak preview, some things we might cover in the next 10 episodes that Lawson and I are going to spend kind of going through some cherry pick content out of the book. What's one or two things that Nehemiah did that you think, man, as a dad, I want to be that way?
I would start with after the wall is built. So like I said, there's a small part of it's actually building the wall. But once that is built, he goes to great lengths to get the book of the law, the scripture that they had read to the people. And not only read to the people, but he had like the experts in the law kind of walking around the crowd, making sure, hey, do you understand what they're being said? And so they're not just hearing it, but they're understanding. And so
I didn't know that.
What speaks out to me about that is from a dad's point of view, what Nehemiah does at first, he takes care of their physical needs, but then, man, he emphasizes their spiritual needs. And I think that is something that dads kind of struggle with, where we think my job is to make sure there's food on the table, clothes on their back. I'll take them to church so they'll learn about God. And Nehemiah's like, no, we'll take care of the physical needs, but then, man, we're going to spend some time on the spiritual needs. And so Nehemiah is great at that. And another thing that stands out is as they're building the wall, every person has a role to play, whether they were like within the camp of Jerusalem, whether they were like lowly or highly, they all were working on the wall. They're all slinging that mud. They're all putting in the rock. And so as dads, we can tend to go, well, I'm the leader. And so you guys are going to take care of the hard stuff. And I'm going to sit back and dictate, but that's not how it was, man. Everyone played their part. Everyone had a role. Didn't matter who you thought you were. For this to get done right, we're all in this together. And so those are the first two that come to mind when you ask about like the leadership lessons and how they can tie into a dad.
To follow up on that, so here are just a handful of things. I'm going through the table of contents. So to give guys a sense for what they could expect, this is going to be on Amazon probably by the time you're listening to this episode. Go check it out, download it off Amazon. It's going to be worth it. Here's some chapters to give you guys a sense. And then Kent, I'll throw it over to you. Any of this that jumps out to you that you want to latch onto and close us with. 28 chapters. Here's just a taste of some of them. Things that you guys gleaned from Nehemiah's life that he did that would be applicable to us as dads. He asks influential people for help. He provides life-giving resources. He discerns true needs of the others around him, mobilizes people to use their gifts, like you just kind of talked about there, Eric, protects loved ones from danger, defers to the needs of others, not putting himself first, relies only on God's strength. Can't we talk a lot about we can do our best? We're not going to be perfect dads. We've got to have the Holy Spirit and God as our Father, Heavenly Father, is our example. He tithes from his first fruits. He praises God through worship. And then one of the last ones I see is he sacrifices for God's purpose. What of those, as I just kind of rattled through some of the chapters that you guys built, is something that you'd want to leave the audience with? So we're going to get into a 10-part series. Not all of them are going to be covered, but what of those kind of jumps off to you as we wrap this up?
I'd probably take a couple and put them together and double down on what Eric said a moment ago. And that is, I think as dads, we often think our job is primarily physical or even just like, putting food on the table, as Eric mentioned. And I'll tell it just kind of by way of a story. I don't want to pinpoint which of my sons this was, just out of respect for him. But at one point I was sitting on the deck with one of my boys and there was a conversation happening between him and his mom. And I just noticed that my wife was trying to get him to kind of believe thing A, right? And he was resistant to believing thing A. And so there was this kind of like tug of war happening. And I'm watching it happening. And I just said, hey, time out. I'm more concerned about not that you believe thing A. I'm more concerned about the fact that you are resistant to the feedback of your mom. Like I'm just pause for a second. Let's just stop talking about, I want you to do the thing she's asking you to do. The fact that you're not even listening. It's like when her comment comes over the net, I just see it go flying back like a tennis match. Hang on. We're going to try this one more time. She's going to say it and you're going to receive it. You don't even have to agree. I'm not even trying to get you to agree. I'm working on a whole different angle here. And what I was trying to do, Eric, in that moment was I was just trying to teach him the idea that we see in Nehemiah, we see in Proverbs, you see all throughout scripture that like the wise person listens to counsel. That doesn't necessarily mean I agree with everything you say, but what it does mean is that I'm going to listen. Like it's a hallmark of wisdom to listen. And so the reason I mentioned that is because you mentioned it a moment ago, Eric, that we often think our job as a dad may be primarily physical or economic or, take them to soccer or whatever we think our job is. And I think my job as a dad is to train them in godly wisdom. That doesn't mean I have all the answers or they just sit at my feet and I just, wax philosophic every night about all the great things the Lord has shown me. But what it does mean for me is that I'm trying to keep my antenna up for what is the need and what's the spiritual need under the physical need at the moment. And that's one thing I think that Nehemiah, even if you look back to when he first hears about the wall, his cousin or brother, I forget, I think his brother comes to the Capitol and he's like, how's it going? And he's like, horrible, man. The wall's down. Everybody doesn't know what they're doing. And Nehemiah's knee-jerk reactions were like prayer and repentance and like sadness. They were just he felt deeply. And I think he was spiritually really, really sensitive, really like attuned to what's going on with the people. And I would think for dads, one of the things that you're going to get out of the next 10 episodes of the podcast is this perspective of Nehemiah, who could both kind of kick butt and take names. He could do the physical provision. He could govern, like he could, say trash needs to go here. The articles for the temple need to go here. Like he could govern in a way that was mechanical and strategic, but he also cared very deeply. And he cared at a level that was very spiritual and very God-focused. And I hope that what dads get out of the next 10 weeks is a Godward look at fatherhood through this person of Nehemiah. And what I'd like to do is, Eric, let me give you kind of like the last word, because, you're not on the podcast every week, but we probably need to get you back here more often than we have in the past. I think this is a good impetus because you have a lot to share with dads, both from your time as a youth pastor, your time as a writer, your time as a dad yourself. Let me come at it this way. Close us out with what would be one thing that you would hope a dad would get out of this book. Maybe it's the 10 episodes. Maybe he never buys the book. Maybe it's just from the podcast episode kind of review of the content. What's one thing you want dads to get out of it? Or maybe what's said another way, same question, but said another way. How would you like for a dad to be different? He comes into this podcast series and then he gets out of the other end of this podcast series. How's this dad different? Or what's one thing he got out of it or learned through the process?
Let's see. One thing would probably be the sacrifices Nehemiah made. Like, as you read through those chapters, every decision he made, starting when he just goes to the king, it's like, hey, I know I'm kind of the cupbearer here. Is it cool if I take a sabbatical for like, I don't even know how long? Like, that's risky as like for his life. Like, it could be sacrificing his life. And then when the king's like, yes, I'll grant it. He's like, okay. And while I've got you, I'm going to need some material. Like, he just kept everything Nehemiah did can come back to some sort of sacrifice at his expense, whether it was comfort, time. There's imagery of them building the wall where they have their tools in one hand and a sword in the other. And so there's danger, and like everything was a sacrifice. And so I hope that a dad comes out of this going, man, I'm going to lead my family sacrificially. As God has called me to love my bride, my family, the way that Christ loved his, I'm going to lay down my life every day so that they are better off. That would be, I guess, the one thing I'd want them to walk away with.
Man, what a great word. Thanks for wrapping us up there, Eric. We hope the next 10 episodes are a blessing to you, Dad. We hope that you lead sacrificially. Can't think of a better way to end. Lawson, thanks for hanging out with us today. And Eric, thanks for jumping into this particular episode of the podcast. Maybe along the Nehemiah journey, we'll have you back.
Yeah, I'd love that. Good to meet you, Eric.
Nice meeting you, Lawson.
All right, Dad. See you next week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call the person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, Wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.